led by none other than Mr. Aval Sethi, founder and chief executive of ProTaiga. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for him, please. With 24 years of experience in multidisciplinary areas of strategy, procurement, operations, projects management, facilities management, and Six Sigma process improvement, Aval has built expertise in procurement transformation, negotiations, strategic planning, supplier development, and relationship management. Aval has had a very rewarding career with the elite armored corps of the Indian Army, where he served for over 11 years. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Aval Sethi.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be standing here in such an august gathering of professionals. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to talk about procurement in the digital world. I'm going to place some seeds in your minds that will nurture into thoughts when you go back to your organizations. And it'll probably trigger different processes, different ideas that you could then take and implement within your organization. I'm going to cover a little bit about the procurement landscape as it is moving from the traditional to the digital world. I'm going to talk a little about the talent gap that exists within the procurement domain and something that we need to do to correct that. We're going to talk about the leadership guidelines, roadmap, and some amount of framework for digital transformation, and then changes in the negotiation skills. We've just gone through a wonderful session that talked about strategies for negotiation, and I'm going to re-emphasize some of the discussion points that you just witnessed. Nathan is probably going to be very excited because my first slide is from Deloitte, and a lot of you professionals would have actually seen that Deloitte publishes a global Chief Procurement Officer survey report for the past couple of years. What you see on the slide here is an outcome from the latest 2018 report, and which brings out a few key trends. The foremost being that 78% of the procurement leaders are focusing on cost reductions. No brainer. I think you ask everybody today, and the primary focus is, how do I reduce my cost? But 65% of the people who were surveyed also said that analytics is today extremely important for our organizations. They have been trying to cope with the traditional methods of looking at data and doing their own analysis on that data to present facts and figures to their organization. Data today sits in silos, in buckets, in Excel files, in individual laptops. And when you ask for data, 10 people will present data in 10 different ways to you. There is no single point of analytics capability that exists today. 76% firmly believe that digital strategy is the way forward. But only 6% of the people who were surveyed actually said that they have spend visibility, even though there are large teams that are involved in data gathering in large organizations. But as far as spend visibility is concerned, very few actually get that input. 65% also said and firmly believed that they don't have any visibility beyond their tier 1 supplier base, which means what those suppliers are doing, how they are servicing the needs of that organization is a goal. Let's look at the procurement landscape. So in today's changing business environment, the need for a digital strategy is greater than ever. Going digital by using cloud technology, mobile devices, social media, and big data can fundamentally change the way and can deliver improved performance by reduced cost, faster access to procurement platform solutions, accelerated access to information, flexibility in working, increased innovation and creativity, and improved procurement intelligence. Internet penetration and smart technology has changed the way we shop, eat, pay, travel, and socialize. A large number of consultants are of the view today that 75% of our buying decisions today are influenced by digital platforms and multi-channel retail modes. But what does smart technology growth mean for enterprise procurement teams? The drastic rise in technology will transform the way that people and processes drive value through the enterprise procurement processes. And hold that thought there, because I'm going to come back to this point in the next couple of slides. A lot of you would have heard of the concept of Industry 4.0, and it's been the buzzword for some time now. But Industry 4.0 also has led to the emergence of the Procurement 4.0. But what does Procurement 4.0 actually entail? You talk to different stakeholders, you talk to different leaders, everybody has a different perception, everybody has a different viewpoint. But essentially, the Procurement 4.0 brings about a critical integration of the external knowledge networks which resides with your strategic suppliers and integrates that with your internal business holders, the key decision makers within your organizations, all the stakeholders in the process, in the whole environment that looks at procurement. But that also brings a couple of challenges. The first challenge is, how do you actually digitize? If you talk to different people, digital has no universal meaning today. You talk to 20 people will bring a different thought, a different perspective to digital. Their own definition of digital varies. For some, just bringing technology on board, or a platform on board, or bringing a procurement tool on board is digitization. For someone, integrating the finance process with your procurement is digitization. For somebody, it could be the entire procure to pay cycle. So everybody has a different interpretation of what is actually digitization in procurement. Somebody actually also goes up to the supplier to say, the supplier's process must be on a digital platform, and that's digitization for me because it provides me visibility into what the supplier is doing. The second biggest factor is also around risk management, and that is something that is gaining predominance and prominence today. You work with multiple suppliers. With a digital environment, you're working with suppliers not just within your own city, localized to your business needs and to your facilities, but also across geographies, across regions, across countries. How do you get inroads into how the supplier is working within their own organizations? How are you managing that supplier through digital methods? How are you also then going ahead and addressing small ticket purchases? Every organization today is dependent on ad hoc requirements, also looks at transactional and sometimes what we qualify as the tail end spend, small transactional indirect sourcing categories. How do you bring that and automate that and bring it on a digital environment? How do you actually transform and look at international standards? What's happening outside in the globe? How can we bring that in? One big definition that most of the people have or a comment is, India is a big market, definitely a lot of scope, but a very unstructured market. It's a market where you have unregulated suppliers, where you have immature supply base. How do you address that? Arthur D. Little has developed a framework for procurement that actually works to help the chief procurement officers to develop a digital strategy, to develop a vision, to develop a roadmap for their organization. The framework essentially comprises of 7 components, which are broken up into the 3 core elements and 4 enabling elements. It focuses on supplier innovation, coming and integrating with the complex supply chain network. The first core element talks about supplier innovation management and essentially works around how do you extend the innovation capability of your organization by including the knowledge and the networks of the strategic suppliers and bringing them in-house, integrating it with your stakeholders within your organization, and working well with your supplier to ensure compliance, to ensure deliveries, to ensure risk management. The second talks about the digital supply chain integration. It is about integrating all stakeholders who are involved in your supply chain and bringing it on in the changing environment has put a humongous amount of pressure on the leaders. The latest report, and a couple of days back in the Times of India newspaper, there's a report by the DDI that actually talks about the investment that organizations make in leadership development. And the report says that $3.6 million has been spent per 1,000 individuals that have been selected within organizations in India. How do you compare this to something that is happening in other countries? A 3.6 compares to a $35 million investment. And why this is, and why this huge gap is because the pool that we select within organizations is very small. We handpick 1 or 2 individuals, and that's about it. And that's, we say, is our development. The HR is focused on making sure that 1 or 2 people are handheld through that journey, because it's the CEO's or the managing director's mandate, and it's an investment and just that they're willing to make. But what happens, the biggest drawback is when it transfers from year 1 to year 2, everybody was very excited, very thrilled in the first year, but then it peters down. The HR, who's actually given the responsibility, says, I have too much of other things to do. I don't have the time or the bandwidth, or I have other priorities on my list. I just can't be doing this. But this is again a gap, and this is slowly increasing. There are very few who take the initiative, who go out, even pay their own money to skill up. I've seen a lot of my peers in my previous organizations actually go abroad to various business institutes and pick up knowledge, even though they've paid out from their pocket. They've taken a break. But how many? Very, very few. Very, very few. Because most of the leaders feel that now they've reached a position, it's their birthright. They will decide what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and therefore I don't really need to change. A lot of you would have heard of the VUCA environment. And while I'm not going to focus on that because we have another very exciting session here that is going to talk about the VUCA. But Amog Deshmukh from the Development Dimensions International, and that's the organization I spoke about previously, the report that had come out. He says that many organizations have extensive focus on 10% of formalized learning. About 20% time is spent in coaching. But is that all that individuals need? There is a 70% knowledge that people learn on the job, that people adapt to the changing requirements in the business. What happens to that and how is that plugged? People are left to themselves to adapt, to skill, to learn, and to challenge that environment. But is there any hand-holding that goes up? Very little coaching on the job. So what are some of the leadership guidelines for the digital age? 3 key pillars. Let's look at the business environment, let's look at the organization, and then let's look at the changes in strategy. When we talk of the business environment, digitization actually requires an unbiased understanding of the external requirement. I think most of us would have heard of the Porter's 5 forces, the external environments. Are they still valid in the digital environment today? The physical barrier to entry, are they still valid? Is that still being taught in a lot of course curriculum? Does that need to change? The organization, what's happening at the organizational level. Firstly, digitization requires a reformulation of the firm's mission. We've seen a number of organizations who were very rigid in the mindset, who didn't want to change. Today, they no longer exist. A lot of organizations felt that the business that they've got into will last forever. Somebody can pick up one example of an organization. Somebody heard of Kodak? Easy example. You will similarly see many examples of organizations who were initially very rigid in their approach, didn't want to change. They thought their product is the best. I don't need to change anything to do it. Very slowly died out. The meaning and impact of digital to the firm must be clearly understood. So, there's a huge opportunity of not just to customize your products and services, but it's about changing the entire organization. The strategy and the structure needs to change. Digital understanding and capabilities are required across the firm. So it's not just the responsibility of that particular leader or the person who's in the position of power, but it's all the functions in the firm and cooperation from the junior most contributor right up to the top. There's also an element of culture. And how do you change a culture in an organization? The culture can only be changed when it is driven from the top. The leaders within organizations have to emphasize changed mindset into a digital era. A lot of us sitting here would be in that position, the leadership group, to be able to emphasize, brainstorm within our organizations and discuss what needs to change and how do we change it. Change is a constant, but change management is the toughest part. And this is something that a lot of you would have often heard, but it's actually a fact too. And so how do you make that change? Digitization requires a higher level of collaboration, and it's across business units, it's across the organization with different stakeholders, from top to down, across unilaterally. Also to remember is that in the digital era, you also need a lot of engagement with public. Today is a world of social media. A couple of negative remarks in social media about your organization can flip and turn the whole perception of the organization. It can actually drive a lot of businesses down. How do you engage with the external public? How do you actually co-create with the external environment, with the external public? And how do you crowdsource ideas? How do you take on thoughts that are coming from the external environment and reorganize to create a benefit? Let's look at some strategic elements. When we develop strategy within organizations, what do we normally do when we have leadership meets? We develop 5-year plans. We develop long-term processes. In the digital environment, that may not be valid today. The business models are rapidly changing. The demands of the environment are changing. The customer expectations are changing. If you develop a 5-year plan, 5 days from now, it will no longer be valid. Do you keep reinventing the wheel? Do you keep these discussions ongoing? Or do you want to be agile and say, I will adapt, I will change in a continuous methodology, in a continuous process as we move along? We don't need really a 5-year plan, but we may have a 6-month plan, a 6-month window to relook at whatever we've discussed today. Decision making today is a lot data driven. But what is your input to quality data? what have we put in place that actually provides us intelligence. In the absence of big data, what used to be allowable as an educated guess will become at best a stab in the dark. Digitization also requires organizations to venture into uncharted territories. Because there are so many opportunities that are coming up in the environment today, it actually allows you to step into a new world. But organizations have to take that bold step, have to believe that that will be the future. If that didn't, the Ubers, the Airbnbs of today would never have existed. It was a complete change. It was a mind shift. We would have continued looking at the traditional methods of transportation of the hospitality industry had somebody not taken that bold step to venture uncharted territories. And digitization also is about continuous management of change. So it's continuously evolving. So where are we on the roadmap? What's the digital journey? 3 key pillars of the digital journey. It has to be about the culture, it has to be about the people and skills, and it has to be about the processes and the structure. Let's look at the framework for driving digital transformation. Digital disruption today is no longer a question of if, but when. Because disruption is happening, whether you like it or not, that is coming. And it's coming in a big way. Leading an organization's digital transformation requires tackling 3 questions. The first one is around intelligence. It's about how do you look at the environment and how do you get the data inputs. The second is about integration, is then how do you leverage all of these inputs, the different digital channels, to transform the organizational processes and create agility. And the third is about the impact and how do you implement. Rethinking how the digital dynamics can improve a company's value proposition. Customers have different demands today than what they were demanding a few years ago. And unless we position our offering to what our customers expect, we will soon be out of business. But as we move along the digital journey, we also need to measure our success. And the success comes from focus areas. It's about the initiation phase, where you look at the networks outside through social media and external networks. The second is about the ritualization of how do you interact in the digital medium? How do you interact with the different stakeholders? And the third is about internalization, is when you're wanting to implement. Let's talk a little about negotiation skills. And we've already heard a very exciting panel discussion earlier on in the day. But I'm going to give a very different perspective to negotiations. Negotiation is an art, and it is something that does not come naturally to a lot of people. It has to be learned. And I'm a firm believer of that. There is a very prominent industrialist who has a UK and then a US background, Jean Paul Getty. And his quote, "My father said, you must never try to make all the money that's in a deal. Let the other fellow make some money too, because if you have a reputation for always making all the money, you won't have many deals." Now, this is a concept that we've all grown with. A win-win situation. Always strike a balance. Always make money and let the other guy make money. But is that concept valid? Is the whole negotiation style changing? Is the whole negotiation demands different today in the digital environment than they were earlier? I saw a lot of smiling faces at the end of it, but how many did actually think about that option? No one? One person. Wow. And that's exactly what negotiation today is. Thinking out of the box. A good negotiator's demand is to think outside the box. Work with. In large organizations, you could be working with thousands of suppliers. In my previous organization, I worked with close to 5,000 suppliers across geographies. But could I build relationships, strong bonds with every single supplier? No. It has to be with very few key strategic suppliers. The 80-20 Pareto principle of who contributes the maximum to your organization. When you look at the key qualities in a negotiator today, there are two pillars on which it matters. The first is the character traits, which are essentially honesty, flexibility, and consciousness. And the other is about personality traits, and we've seen the creative element, the awareness, and the win-win oriented, but more focused on value creation. So why negotiate? Why do we actually want to negotiate? There's again a very famous quote by Kevin Kennedy, who's a professor. Animals do not negotiate. They use violence or threat of violence to get what they want, whether it be a food, a mate, or a territory. Have you ever seen two dogs negotiate over a bone? Negotiation is anathema to tyrants. Tyrants would demand and forcefully get what they want, but not negotiation. You would have also or be aware of the 4 decision-making tools that have been traditional to the procurement and negotiation styles. The first is about persuasion. Second, about giving in. Sometimes the cost is too high. You don't really want to push your supplier. So you say, okay, I'll agree to your terms, I give in. Sometimes it is about problem solving. How do you work better with your suppliers? But sometimes it's also about forcing your way through. It's coercion. Sometimes it's threat. Sometimes it's, you don't give me a deal, I walk away, you'll never get my business. Sometimes that works. It has to be a very balanced approach. So negotiating in the digital age, today technology is changing the deal making. Technology today has enabled a mobile workforce. Everybody's on smartphones. A lot of you today here sitting, missing offices, would probably be sometimes on your emails, on your phones, outside. You're still working. You're still looking at some element, even if it's for 5 minutes, but you still have your mind set somewhere else because of the mobility. Creating value, thoroughly understanding your adversary, their needs, and what value you might bring to them. It's always about that question, why is he sitting with me to negotiate? What can I bring to the table that's of value to him? How do I get into a better leverage with that person? How many of you consider email to be one of the best negotiating tools? The flip to sitting in a room face to face is, when I ask a question, I expect a reply. But emails are non-synchronous. When you negotiate over email, you may get a question, but you can sit back, think about your reply. You can discuss with other stakeholders, come with an informed decision, and then reply. So the email changes the negotiation. Negotiating via video conferencing. Earlier, if you wanted to negotiate with another organization, you would have 1 or 2 stakeholders because of the travel costs, the time and the distance involved. Today, if you're connected on video conferencing, you could have people across geographies. And you could have all the decision makers and the stakeholders all together in one room to take a call. Another new concept that is evolving today is information-based negotiation. It's a very radically different approach to negotiation. It involves a lot of hard work because it involves data digging. It actually hinges around the fact that you know more than your supplier does of his business. Because you've gone through reports, you've gone through surveys, you've gone to feedback through customers, you've seen experiences shared by other individuals who've taken up that product or the service of that supplier. And when you sit in a room to discuss with your supplier, the supplier cannot fib with you. Some of the new emerging technologies will actually influence the way that information-based negotiations will conduct in the near future. And we've heard a lot about blockchain. It's all about data integrity and verification at every step. Virtual reality and spatial analytics, creating a video framework of every step of the negotiation at every stage. Predictive analytics models helps in the total cost of ownership. Predictive analytics also, based on the past trends, will also predict on how your consumption patterns will occur in the future. How much volume do you need to predict? What inventory holdings do you need to take up? And social media harnessing, marketing campaign efficiencies. We're all probably on a lot of social media elements, the LinkedIn, the Facebook, the Twitter. Some of us are very active on social media. Some of us are not so active, but social media is there. Any questions? Yes, please. Are we out of time? Okay.
American companies. I hope I was audible, or do I have to repeat?
No. I heard your question. When you look at the market in India today, you can very easily tier the market into a couple of tiers. The top tier would be the global MNCs, who essentially comes with global mandates of adopting or implementing technologies. They would have automated their finance processes, they would have automated their procurement processes, they would have automated some amount of the organizational workflows. Leave them for a sec. But if you look at all the others, the approach always is, I have a need in a particular function, I will bring something that automates some of the processes in the workflows within that function, and that's about automation. The Indian market today is at a very nascent stage, even though we've been talking about technology from the last couple of years. But today, the adoption is not as prevalent because everybody's waiting for someone else to take the lead. Let me see my colleague there, let him pick up something, let me see and experience how his implementation has worked for him, and then I will take a call.
So who, according to you, would be the leaders in adopting this digital? Or who would be the first amongst, say, the MNCs that you just talked about?
So MNCs, we have, I think, a lot of representative. Capgemini, for example, Deloitte, a couple of other organizations here. So the big global MNCs would definitely have systems, processes and tools within their organizations. But if you, and some of the large Indian corporates too, you look at Infosys, you look at Wipro, while they've adopted, while they are IT companies, but the adoption and the technology they have is either an SAP, Ariba,
right,
somebody from an external source, somebody from outside of India. We still have to see Indian companies or Indian MNCs adopting local technologies, because the way that the technology environment has also developed within India is very fragmented. There are very small players who've come in the market looking at working closely with an organization to suit their requirements and needs. So you would have seen digital catalog companies come up whose reach and wherewithal is very limited in geography or cities and organization based. You would have seen other process automation companies come in who work with just 2-3 companies, and that's about it. That's about their reach. And I think I'm going to talk a little more about my organization, ProTaiga, and from the background where I come from, is that is something that I'm very actively looking to change in the Indian context, in the Indian environment. Because I firmly believe, and based on my experience within the procurement domain and within the business domain, is that unless you change the mindset of the organization to adopt end to end, there's really no value that you can get out.